For people who interview potential candidates for high-level positions, what was the worst interview you conducted? I asked an engineer, "What do you love about engineering?" And they paused for a long moment and then told me they didn't love anything about it. I panicked and tried to save it for them and said, "Oh, what about the team you're on right now?" And they said, "Oh, my team is great. But I don't think I want to be a software engineer anymore. I don't think I like it at all." At this point, the interview was dead, and we had a policy not to end early. So I asked them, "What's something you do love?" And we talked about knitting for 45 minutes. It was really fun. They didn't get the job. Story 2. A friend of mine was interviewing a candidate for a customer-facing managerial position. Public university, think head of department kind of role. This woman was adamant about being the opposite of a people person, said she prefers to work alone. The position is basically half delegation, and the other half is collaboration. And said her biggest weakness was trying to relate to those who reported to her. She didn't elaborate, and didn't seem to understand that she was giving the literal worst answers possible at every point. The most awkward part was the fact that when no one was hired for the role, they reposted the job listing, and that woman applied again, and they were required by law to interview her again. The candidate was made aware that no one interviewed was deemed a good fit. Her answers did not change. Commenter, maybe the candidate just wasn't savvy. Like, they would keep applying because the HR department was being too oblique for the candidate in their responses, and they need someone to bluntly say, "We're not hiring you because we need a people person." There are a lot of dumb smart people in the big leagues. They can have multiple degrees and still not see the forest for the trees. Story 3. I interviewed a guy for a head of marketing position many years ago. This guy shows up to the interview and is immediately smug as hell. We haven't even started yet. He refuses to turn on his camera, instantly remarks how he worked for Facebook, and let it be known that he's the real deal. I ask him, "What are the channels for video game marketing?" And he responded with, "I don't know, does it matter?" Astonished, we asked him how he would approach marketing different platforms, and he responded, "With lots of money." I asked him if he realized we were an indie company, and he was like, "That doesn't matter." Halfway through the interview, the CEO himself finally begged me to stop the interview. We contacted our recruiting firm and told them he was the single worst candidate we had ever encountered. They dropped him as a client because apparently this wasn't even the first time he was a terrible interview. I still remember his name. He ended up going back to Facebook. Seemed like he tested the market, realized he wasn't and then went back home where he could blend in as a useless Nepo baby. Story 4. I interviewed a guy for a higher-level management position for the company I worked for. Attire was supposed to be business professional. He showed up in a Hawaiian shirt, jeans, and flip-flops because he thought this interview was just a formality, and he believed his supposed reputation in the industry just preceded him. I had no idea who he was. When he realized we were actually asking questions, he just said, "Trust me, I'm the guy for the job," over and over and over again. It became a running joke for all of us when we'd get a new assignment. Story 5. I once interviewed a woman who was a Dolly Parton impersonator in her spare time. No word of a lie, she asked what the hours were. I told her they weren't set as such, reasonably flexible, and that I was more interested into what she put into those hours than the hours she did. She replied, "Not 9 to 5 then," and proceeded to start singing that song. I swear she was crackers, to be honest. As soon as a candidate breaks into song, I'm going to be looking for the hidden cameras and thinking about who in my department set up this prank. Story 6. Some guy came in and he was the spitting image of Mr. Bean. He had a briefcase/suitcase and was dressed in tweed. It wasn't a joke he was just that way, but me and HR just couldn't keep it professional. He said things like, "Oh, I'm never sick except at Christmas when my mom said I was talking to the curtains." HR woman had to leave after that one and get herself together. Commenter, surely just for the amazing trial period. He'd probably destroy the business, but it'd be an Izane ride. If it's Mr. Bean rules, he may, through a series of increasingly improbable coincidences and mistakes, accidentally be the CEO of the company by the end of the week. Story 7. Not me, but someone told me about a guy who applied at a director position and brought his mom with him. Another one. One guy had his mom on the phone because she was president of the company and he thought that would help. Doesn't matter who your mommy is, still have to go through the interview process. Story 8. Not me, but my mother. Interviewed a guy for their chief safety and security position. They asked why he was leaving his last job after 15 plus years. He responds completely seriously that he was actually forced to resign shortly after he sent in his resume because he neglected a final security check at his facility, which resulted in a fire. They asked for more details and learned that his negligence led to a loss of over $2 million for his former employer. And because no one was hurt, they made a deal that he would resign and forfeit his severance package to boot. When they asked why they should hire him considering that information, he replied that it was just one mistake, so they shouldn't take it so seriously. Commenter, he had such a good opportunity to give a great answer. Because that company just spent $2 million training me to never make such a mistake again. Story 9. Interviewed a woman for a chief product officer role. probably in her mid-40s. For a large enterprise company, I was 34M. She was so nervous that she was shaking badly, and partway through the interview asked if she could hold my hand to calm herself. I let her, and it worked, and she calmed down. But given our CEO was a straight-up psychopath, I decided she would probably not be able to handle him well. Story 10? Not a high-level position, but two of us were interviewing a candidate for a job. He was perfect, fully qualified, mature, exactly what we were looking for. He was a shoo-in for the job. At the end, I asked him if he had any questions or comments for us. He said he wanted to be honest with us. He was angry at his previous employer and was suing them over a faked injury. The candidate wanted us to know he was perfectly healthy and nothing was actually wrong with him. He felt like it was the right thing to do to tell us. Boy, we dodged a bullet. Story 11. Not me, but my mom was part of the interview of some high-up position in the company she worked for. She said this one woman came in and didn't seem nervous or anything and did fine in the interview. Not particularly good, but fine then when they walked her out and came back to discuss their notes of her. Someone noticed a weird smell. Turns out her chair was soaked with pee. She just pissed all over the chair onto the carpet below, but because of the layout of the room, no one noticed. She was wearing a black dress, so no one noticed when she walked out by looking at her. She could have easily asked to use the bathroom, but didn't. They had to throw out the chair and get the carpet professionally cleaned. She did not get the job. Story 12. Senior engineer role in person right before the pandemic. Guy kept steering all his answers to technical questions back to the time he'd spent with Peace Corps. After the third time, I just let him ramble. When we were done, I offered to toss his empty cup and he was weirdly protective of it, like insisted it was too much trouble and I could just show him the kitchen on the way out. Sure, whatever. Guy washes his paper cup before throwing it out and leaves. In our follow-up meeting to discuss the candidate, our director was pissed because the guy wouldn't stay on topic, and if he didn't know any better, he'd think the candidate was drunk. And then it clicked as to why he'd been so odd with the cup. We did not make an offer. Story 13. I was chair of a committee to screen a new library director. The candidate came in and was dismissive of me from the beginning. It was if she was insulted that a lowly librarian was interviewing her instead of a dean or provost. Then during the interview, she asked a question which I was answering. She interrupted me, told me I wasn't answering her question correctly, and then proceeded to explain my library to me. The faces of the rest of the committee were hilarious to watch. They gave up on poker faces and just let their true opinions show. Several just put their pens down and just went through the motions with the rest of the interview. I'm not sure she was savvy enough to notice. Story 14. I was hiring for a role, and someone reached out to me via LinkedIn to let me know they'd applied. Totally fine. It turns out he was the son of a former coworker, which was interesting to know, but not really relevant to the hiring process. I reviewed his resume, but unfortunately, he didn't have the experience needed for the role. His background was in completely different industries. Since I used to work with his mom, I gave him that feedback, and he was totally understanding. His mother, my former coworker, then reached out to me, pleading her son's case. She even said she'd personally fill in any gaps in his knowledge and coach him through the role, insisting that I give him a chance. Two big problems with this. Having your mom reach out like this makes it seem like you can't stand on your own in the workplace. His mom and I now work for direct competitors. There's proprietary information involved, and she would potentially have access to it. That's a major conflict. Bottom line, don't have your mom reach out for you in a job application, and definitely don't bring her with you. Story 15. I once set up an interview with someone for a lead position at a company I've since left. Right from the start, they sent me a snarky email saying, if you're going to post a job, at least make sure the people you mention actually work there. I was confused, so I asked them to clarify. They responded, claiming the name of the company's founder, or director, listed in the ad wasn't accurate, and that no one went by that name in the list of employees on the website. Confused, I double-checked our website, and right at the very top of our Meet the Team page has the name and photo of the company director, which matched the name listed in the ad. I therefore went back to the candidate and confirmed that the name of the director on the job ad was indeed correct, and apologized if they misread this. They responded, completely unacknowledging my response, to confirm their interview time. Weird, but okay. Fast forward a few days to the interviews, and we are conducting the initial rounds via Zoom. The candidate from the email tried to join the meeting 45 minutes before their scheduled time while I was interviewing another candidate, so I declined their request to enter and intended on giving them a call once finished to see if something happened they needed to meet earlier. Before the other interview even ended, I received a rambling email where they berated me for not letting them in early and threatened to report me to company director's name. I simply replied, "We don't have anyone by that name working here," and then blocked them. Story 16. Two stories. In the middle of an interview I had a few years ago, my soon-to-be manager thanked me for dressing up and explained to me the guy he interviewed the day before showed up in a mesh t-shirt. Second story. Interviewed a lady for a senior data science position who continually said things like, "I'm a perfectionist. If there is something I don't like, I will do it myself. I have rewrote almost all my old company's policies." The interview went from, ooh, this lady really likes do get done, to, ooh, this lady is going to be in everyone's. Story 17. Senior engineer position. She just straight up typed out questions in ChatGPT and read them verbatim. She told us, I don't know what KKL is, but then gave us a dictionary answer about 3 seconds later on log analytics workspaces and the basis of KKL as a language. She wasn't even good at cheating. Commentaire. My company has started to get worried about this. We've had graduates get hired who turned out to have very little actual knowledge of the subject they purportedly got a degree in. Lots of cheating going on in college, especially where coursework is a good chunk of the result. Story 18. I actually had my stalker come into my office responding to a hiring notice I'd posted on LinkedIn after the position was already filled. He was just trying to get access to me. Security escorted him out. He ended up getting deported after police paid a visit to his actual workplace. Another one candidate showed up in pajamas and tried to pitch their startup idea while yawning through the whole interview. Story 19. I'm a senior engineer at our firm and often sit in on interviews to gauge technical prowess. We had some kid come in fresh out of college, and it was evident he read or was given some advice to come off demanding the "if you know exactly what you want, people will respect you" type of thing. It was almost comical. He came in and said things like, look, we all know the back and forth. The bottom line is, I'll help progress this business and take you in new directions. He was also saying things like, I'll need you to stock Pete's dark roast coffee in the kitchen. I like my lunchtime around 2 p.m. I need vacation time available immediately. Mr. Confidence turned into Mr. Confidently Rejected on the spot. At one point, my boss even asked, are you always like this, or are you just nervous? I never saw a face sink like that so fast. We even gave him pointers to tone it down, or he's going to have a really hard time out there. Story 20. I was interviewing a candidate for a senior role at a tech company. At first, no immediate red flags when he came in. He was decently dressed, looked clean and professional. When we sat down to start the conversation, he handed me a pamphlet, like the kind you get at doctor's offices for different disease or medication information. Except this pamphlet had a big picture of his headshot on the front, and he proceeded to walk me through the pamphlet about himself. This includes details of his personal interests as well as his resume details. I couldn't take him seriously after that and was trying not to burst into laughter for the entire 45M interview. Story 21. I interviewed this candidate for a startup. Every time he didn't know how to answer a question about his previous experience, he'd claim he couldn't because of an NDA. I gave him the benefit of the doubt until he finally admitted that he had put something on his resume just so that he gets calls from recruiters. But this wasn't even the worst part. At the very end, he thanked me for my time and then said, I hope to work here at X. X was not my company's name. It's not like he mixed us up with some other company. He got it wrong. And I corrected him and he just casually said, oh, that's what you're called. So it wasn't a genuine slip of the tongue either. We didn't really have a policy for ending an interview early when there's no hope at all, so that was a colossal waste of my precious time. Story 22. I was the lead tech for a smaller MSP at the time, around 2010-ish, so I would conduct the technical part of the interviews. We were looking for either another SR sysadmin or a SR project manager. An older gentleman, mid-50s, came in interviewing for a position. He had been the IT guy for his last company, but that company went under and left him out of a job. The company he worked for never upgraded a single piece of IT infrastructure unless it broke. There was no replacement. Because of this, he had only worked with Windows 98. It was honestly heartbreaking watching this man realize he had been stuck in a time capsule for the past 20-ish years. No experience with Active Directory or Exchange, thought Office 365 was just a fad. The dude was making 6 figures at his previous position, and he would be making roughly half that at the place he was interviewing for. I watched a man realize that he was living in a little remote paradise for the past 10 years, and emerged into a post-apocalyptic wasteland by comparison. He walked out of the interview haunted. I hope he found something and managed to retire comfortably. Story 23. Not super high level, but I conducted many interviews for senior system admin positions. I had thought a good strategy would be to ask about the things they list on their resume to give them a chance to show off their skills and impress me. Turns out this is more of a landmine than a chance to show off. I had one guy tell me he had never used Linux despite putting Linux admin experience on his resume. His logic was that he knows Windows, so how much different can it be? This happened many times, and it's why I insisted competent technical staff be present at interviews and allowed to question candidates instead of just HR. Story 24. I was interviewing people for a staff-level software engineering position on my team. For high-level IC positions, you often see a common type of person, someone who moved into middle management, like a director level, at their previous role but wants to get back to the technical work. This one guy from Wisconsin, which is important, applied and had been in management for years. My technical interviews are usually a series of 5 questions that slowly ratchet up in difficulty or complexity as a way of just level setting. You can't really fail it, just tells me where you land in terms of experience and title, should we make an offer. In the first question, which is basically training wheels for anyone who has ever written any code in their lives, the guy just starts saying, ah geez, in his thick Midwest accent. He is also muttering stuff like, I'm blowing it, quietly under his breath. I think it was a full-on panic attack, which I totally get. He then just refused to do any kind of coding live. Again, this is like write a function that multiplies two integers together in any language you want. As we end the call, and he is incredibly contrite and says he will follow up if I send him the exercise via email. I agree, although I know I won't be considering his candidacy. And we part. 2 days later, I get the angriest email from him saying that technical interviews like that are unfair, and we sprang it on him. The tone was so different, I thought it was another person. Very odd. Story 25. For a while, I had managerial oversight over our call center. Without giving away too much personal info, we take over 5,000 inbound per day, with between 500, 2,500 outbound calls performed by our staff, depending on season and if anything is broken, finance-related. I'm interviewing someone for a manger role. Not a supervisor, but the person who all of the supervisors would report to. Position needed 7 years experience with at least 3 years of call center time, at least 2 years of management or supervising experience, all the good stuff. It's a Zoom interview because this is a couple years ago, but this person is visibly drunk, slurring words, head drooping, the works. I do the introduction and turn on the recording, and they start off by asking if they'll have to talk to customers because they refuse to talk to customers, and they told the last guy that, yeah, you will probably handle some escalations, which I said. They swear audibly and say something like, okay, fine, but I'll need to negotiate a higher starting. I've never taken calls before. A what? A waiter or a bartender clips into their background at one point, meaning that they were doing this interview in public. I ask about it, and they say they don't have internet at their home right now. Okay, fine, whatever. And they may need to work out of a coffee shop for the first few months. I say that's not possible because we deal with sensitive information. You need a private location. They then ask me if the company is going to pay for their housing, which I say we can't do. It only went downhill from here. They were probably minutes from face planting and passing out before I ended the call. And because you know this is coming, 3 days after I had HR send out the standard, thank you for your interest. But we've decided to go in a different direction email and call. They accused me of racism, gender discrimination. I sent over the recording of the interview to legal with a very big smile on my face. I've been told that legal still shows it to newbies in their department when they need a laugh. Story 26. I interviewed someone for a high-value assets management position, and, just starting the interview, my colleague and I noticed that they were not suitable for the role. A bit like that fella who was interviewed live by mistake on the BBC, but without the comedy element. We cut the interview short so as to not waste anyone's time, thanked them for their time, and asked if they had any questions for us. With a straight face, they say, yes. What is high-value assets? Needless to say that they did not get hired, and we're still wondering how they passed the first round of interviews. Story 27. 9 years ago, we were hiring for a CFO. The person came from the third largest civil engineering contractor in the United States. Total package was over $800K. Our office is suit and tie. Totally corporate, presidential, and mayor candidates have been in our office. Just to give an idea on the type of office it was. Guy walks in for the CFO interview in sandals, flip-flops, shorts. Fell asleep at the chair waiting for the interview. Safe to say, he did not get the job. The person was highly recommended. His name is well known in the industry. We couldn't believe it. I did meet him a few years back and he fell asleep at a fundraiser. Story 28. My company is a government contractor, and they have me help out with interviewing for other contracts as a domain expert in cloud engineering and architecture. A few weeks back, the hiring manager and I are interviewing a candidate for a cloud architect/team lead position. Generally, the higher you go, the less technical you become. The idea is that you grow out of solving all the nitty-gritty problems and focus more on the big picture. But you still need to be able to understand the nitty-gritty. I've got a standard slate of questions that I use, but I also try to develop questions based on the candidate's resume, all to discover their level of technical competency, as well as their capability and style of leadership. For a management position, we're a bit more lenient on the technical, but they still need to understand what their people are doing and struggling with. This guy bombs every technical question, even after I adjust down to relatively softball questions. Responds multiple times with, I'm not a developer. He managed developers and engineers. Towards the end, I ask, what is a technical challenge in the last 5 years that you're most proud of solving? Basically, brag to me about something you've done. I've found this gives people a chance to end an interview on a high note in case my questions don't quite line up with their experience or they were nervous and blank. Some candidates have changed my recommendation from a no to hire this person. This candidate's answer is something his previous team did, so I drilled down with questions about his specific contribution. Turns out he did nothing while being the technical lead of his previous team. After that became apparent, I asked what he did to mentor his team members and how he helped them grow their careers. I send them links after work to blog posts I read during that day. So basically nothing. That was the first and only absolutely not I've ever entered into our candidate tracking system. Story 29. Guy, part owner and chief engineering role, interviewed candidates for a CEO role. I warned the exec team that the person seemed out of touch with operations and overly focused on financials, with rather strange ideas of how he was going to change things. Rather, marquee-level high spending ways that had little to do with the company's reality. I warned them he seemed like the kind of person that would come in, fire a lot of people, and make drastic, unaccountable changes unrelated to the core business that he didn't understand and blast out after it was clear he was shaking trees and making noise. I unfortunately found out they were deeply upset by my blunt assessments. One of the women that selected the candidate felt she had found a unicorn, and that I came across as sounding like I thought he was a scam man, which was pretty close to the truth to my less reserved opinions. He seemed to jump from ship to ship in the past, overplaying results dramatically compared to when I looked into the previous companies on his resume. The exec team felt I was personally insulting their personal judgment. Needless to say, they didn't do due diligence beyond sitting through his various dog and pony shows. The exec team took a deep dislike to me in the following months, and it became clear there was a clique that was fermenting disrespect and exclusion and outright outbursts at times. I had invented the product. I had developed it all. They were my hires into the business to help it grow. I was stepping back to start another company. The new CEO role was important to me. Within 6 months of hiring, the company was blasting through all of its cash on hand with bizarre and ineffective marketing and sales from marquee but useless expensive agencies. We found out later he had drafted himself as the largest shareholder and used that to buy a new home. The docs he made were fraudulent. He also filed liens against the company for $150K in back pay after not showing up for the last month when people caught on the jig was up. None of this ever came through for him, but it ended up costing nearly $50K in legal fees to win in court. He was filing motions left and right to try and exhaust our willingness to fight it. The business went tits up after the exec team basically left. They began fighting among themselves. The lesson is, the people you hire are important. The scammers all know how to manipulate better than the better people. The exec team fooled me, and the person they hired fooled them. Be careful out there. I'm on my 4th high-tech business startup, and I continually have to risk coming off as an asshole to explain these sorts of things to my other stakeholders when we are looking for people to add to the team. These skills are rare out of the box and are usually hard-won. We have dodged some massive bullets at times due to conflicts with hiring good people versus marquee scammers. And it has meant that being an asshole at times to break the spell of a scammer also brings understanding and respect after a few successful hires. Story 30. My boss and I interviewed a woman who spoke too long about her many cats, and when asked about her previous job, began to cry. My instincts said she might need some time to sort things out before diving into another job, and my boss hired her. I was flown up to train her for 2 weeks at great expense for the company and effort from me. She quit 6 months into the job. Story 31. Interviewed someone for a security position, basically to handle cloud conversion stuff that I needed off my plate so I could focus on some higher-level design. I asked him what his biggest screw-up was, while indicating that mine was once taking a data center offline and how I recovered. He said he once nuked a large production Oracle database. I asked him how he recovered from that, and he responded, "Well, I had roots, so nobody found out," with a smile. Why on earth would you say something like that? Story 32. We were interviewing for the art director position at a 50-person video game studio. A candidate had 27 mistakes on his resume. Typos, formatting errors, and incomplete sentences. I brought this up to the studio general manager and he said, "He's dealing with art. How much is he going to have to write?" They hired him, in part because he'd done one of the voices on the original Warcraft game. Our studio closed 5 months later. Story 33. Boss lets me know they found a perfect fit, great recommendations, and are extending the offer. I asked who interviewed him. "We aren't. He's perfect fit and have multiple personal recommendations." I pushed back. "You never hire someone without an interview." We meet the guy. Dressed well in a suit, nice leather attaché. He pulls out copies of resume on nice paper for us, along with some samples of his work. I peruse his work while boss asks normal stuff. I see something different and ask a curious question. He stumbles and can't answer. No biggie. I didn't recognize it, so probably esoteric. I start asking easier question about work he brought. He can't answer any of them. I finally ask him what his role was associated with what he provided. Did he write it, modify it, or just run it? He completely changes his demeanor and says he just really needs a job. He's better at asterisk, insert other department here asterisk, and do we have any openings there? Story 34. I am the founding owner of my business. We bring in about $600K/year in profit, and it's a very small team. I'm not who you would normally think of as the big boss. I'm pretty casual. I am so very not alpha male. If I can wear a t-shirt and sandals to the office, I will. I don't drive a fancy car, just a base model Toyota Tacoma. I pay my people very well. I provide a very nice place to work. In the rare chance I need to hire someone, I want to find the perfect person, because I plan on keeping them around for a long while. On the off chance I do interview people for a position, I'm not who they think they'll see. They see some chum sitting in front of a laptop with some chill music. I probably have a cup of coffee, maybe a Coke. I don't have an expensive watch or anything like that. I've had a couple of people come in and act all alpha male. They think they can step on me to get to the top. They look around for the boss. They try to impress me to show dominance. These are people who don't do even the most basic research before going into an interview. Had they done so, they would have recognized me immediately. I'm on the website, I've done media interviews, etc. It's actually kind of funny to watch them work. I'm sure they had an influencer show them the 100% guaranteed way to land a job. They tried to bypass the secretary to get a few minutes with the CEO, except they talked to me the whole time. Story 35, interviewing director level, one level below C-suite. And the most egregious thing I found was someone who was just picking holes in the whole business. Like saying how warehouse fulfillment could be done better, product buying could be done better, etc., etc. But firstly, he didn't know enough about how it was done internally to know that his ideas were better. And second, his experience was in marketing and creative. Story 36, hiring a senior data architect in the government. This is a GS-15 remote position non-supervisor. It is basically the holy grail in the federal space. Highest pay band with no supervisor requirements, and remote. Legit thousands of applications for it. We are by law required to ask everyone the same set questions for fairness, only varying via follow-ups on what candidates say. Our technical section is always a set of 5 to 10 preset questions, going from basic information that anyone in that technical role at any level should know to pretty complex. This position's questions go from simple to very difficult. The panel is the hiring manager, myself, low-level data analyst at the time, our DBA, and a guy who has been around forever in a very technical role. Technical question 1. In SQL, can you explain what a left join is and how, when you would use it? We wrote this question last as a basic knowledge check. It was more of a public speaking question. The previous 3 candidates laughed when we asked it. We added this question since the position required advanced understanding of SQL on top of about 1 million other coding languages. We didn't want to waste time on SQL. Dude sputters for a second, gives an answer that amounts to, I would delegate something so basic. Huh? That doesn't make a ton of sense for an explanation. I'm asking the question and just decide to move on to a harder one. Right, as I'm about to ask the next question, the senior dude on my team redirects the question and is basically like, we do have to have you explain what a left join is. The candidate legitimately sputters and says, it seems like you are just trying to use gotcha questions. And if that is how this is going to be, I am not interested. He then immediately signs off Zoom. Story 37. We were interviewing for a chemical engineer position. Specifically, process engineer over a train with 3 reactors. The areas had some pretty bad chemicals, and as such, there was a tour as part of the interview. We asked all candidates to wear appropriate clothing. The candidate came in with open-toe shoes, which were specified as a no-go in the communication. I asked if she had been aware of the tour and dress code, and she said, yes, but you can't wear closed-toe shoes with this outfit. I immediately dropped her off in the HR department and told them, if she can't follow those basic instructions, there is no way I was going to hire her to deal with the chemicals we dealt with. Story 38. Not but someone I know was interviewing people for a high-level position at a company he worked at. All the candidates had great resumes, and as he was waiting for the next candidate, he hears screaming by the hall. He sees the candidate swearing and screaming at a custodian. Custodial just gave a look that could kill. The candidate got angry because the custodian had the audacity to walk past him. He wasn't hit. There were no forms of altercation. But the candidate was disgusted to see a dirty monkey. That candidate was escorted out by security guard Sand. He had come back the next day to sue the company with the police behind him. They were showed the CCTV recording and he was escorted out by the police. Story 39. I interviewed someone about 2 months ago who was the son of a friend of a friend. I received a call asking for the interview, which really put me off. Seemed a little bit hostile, called on a weekend, spoke way too quickly, and sounded a bit entitled. I didn't call him back to schedule. About 2 weeks later, he texts me to follow up. I agree to a Zoom meeting for initial interview. Shows up for interview in his kitchen with a dirty lens that basically hit his face. Explains he wants a video production job. The red flags just keep adding up. When I asked about his education and experience, he went on a 15-minute tirade about how school is useless and that he was homeschooled in an Orthodox religious environment. At this point, I'm thinking this is pointless. But I continue purely on the thought that this kid has been absolutely wrecked by his parents' decisions, and he deserved a fair chance at least once in his life. Things don't get a whole lot better, but eventually he agrees to share some of his portfolio work. As I'm looking through, it's pretty clear this guy thought he could replace a career with TikTok, YT shorts. mostly rage bait type videos. Has several channels pumping out garbage content. I still think about him because I feel bad for him, but I couldn't hire him with someone else's company and a 12-foot pole. Story 40. The candidate was on a panel interview with myself and 3 other people. We were waiting for a 4th interviewer to join because they were having issues with their sound. We made idle chat for about 2 minutes. Then everyone muted, well, almost everyone. The candidate started having a conversation with her male partner about who should fold the clothes on the bed. This prompted one of the interviewers to say, "Mrs. So-and, so you're not muted?" She clearly didn't hear, and then the male voice asked, "Why is your vibrator in the bed? Did you not finish last night?" I think the call organizer muted her, or maybe everyone after that. We were doing a lot of back-channel chat about how to proceed. Ultimately, we carried on with the interview, but she must have known we heard because she went from being bubbly and confident and to shaken and unfocused. I tried to give her an out by asking if she wanted to reschedule, but she did not. She bombed the interview and we passed on her. Happy ending. Though I did reach out to her about a branch opening for a similar position that was more closely aligned with her skill set and with a lot at shorter commute. I made no mention of what we had heard. She did much better with the 2nd round and works there still. Once upon a time, I had a boss, thanks Dave, you're a G, who faked a very loud coughing fit when I started talking shit about our terrible district manager. When I wasn't on mute, I felt I had to balance those karmatic scales. Story 41. Doing a phone interview for a position overseas. My boss is the president of the hiring board. We had over 200 people apply for the position. After scrubbing the resumes, we narrow it to 7 candidates. This is 2008, so jobs are scarce. We get through the initial questions. My boss then launches into his part. I believe that process is the foundation of this position. Within the process, what step is the most important in your opinion? Let me say that this process is well known in relation to the position, and it is in the description of the job posting multiple times. Applicant: I never liked process, so I developed my own. Proceeds to spew his different process for almost 10 minutes with barely a breath. We eventually mute our end, and the boss says, "Well, our next interview is in 40 minutes," while we let him keep spewing. Further context. This position paid $150K in 2008, $223K today. That was essentially disposable income because housing was free. You were provided with a car that had free gas and food was heavily subsidized. $110K of that was tax-free. Every year, you were provided with $12K of airfare to travel to anywhere you wanted for vacation. You received all US holidays as well as host nation holidays, which were an additional 10 days. Every Wednesday ended at 2 p.m. for a free happy hour of food and drinks. I was doing the job in addition to my actual job because it was really not that much. For a normal person, it would have been 20 hours a week max, 30 if you were slow and unorganized. So dude lost a very well-paying position because he couldn't answer the most softball of softball questions and instead gave us his alternate reality. Story 42. Not quite an interview, but as a student government member meeting with a prospective and favored candidate for university president. I asked them about how they'd reshape the engineering curriculum. His answer was, cut the class schedules so that they don't cost as much. One semester for the intro classes, the next for the next in the series. I'm oversimplifying this a lot. When I asked about how the co-op students Asterisk would handle their graduation requirements given their on and off schedule, or if someone had to drop or retake a class, his answer was, well, too bad for them. The faculty search committee got very quiet, and we never saw him again. H** co-op students starting their junior year would spend 6 months working in industry, 6 months in classes, and graduating in 6 years rather than 4. It was an immensely successful and beneficial program. Story 43. I had someone who delivered a decent interview but refused to provide proof of identity and had a meltdown when she discovered we had CCTV. We couldn't hire without proof of rugged to work, and there were a lot of red flags in her behavior, even if she said the right words. Our policy is that hiring managers send feedback forms to AIR, and if the candidate asks, they get sent a summary of our feedback. This particular candidate wouldn't take feedback from them. It had to be me, not my boss who was on the panel, me alone. I sent her feedback over email. She wanted to talk. My very astute and utterly wonderful receptionist fielded her calls for weeks and kept telling her to go to HR, and she was having none of it. Eventually, I answered one of her calls, and it turns out she was trying to ask me out and didn't want a record of it, nor for anyone else to know. So that's why she'd only take the feedback from me and wasn't satisfied with an email. I was wearing my engagement and wedding rings at the interview. I had our legal team on standby as my boss was worried about potential stalking, and we had her tell her not to contact me again. She applied for the next vacancy I listed, and I immediately declined her. And now my organization has a policy where we can't know candidates' names until they confirm they're going to attend an interview. They get a number instead, and HR matched the number to the candidate. Thankfully, I've moved to a different role now, so the chances of running into her again are very slim, but it was alarming to say the least. Story 44. I was part of a panel interview for a position that is largely considered the most powerful non-elected position in our state, US, and we were interviewing a guy who was considered by most on the panel to be the front runner. Everyone on the panel were incredibly important, and they all knew him well. What followed was the strangest, most rambling interview I've ever been a part of, and that's saying something. His answers were long, but didn't actually say anything. He insulted everyone in the room a couple of times, and made it seem like he would accept the job, but only if we forced him. We ended the 90-minute interview at the hour mark, and he left with his towering reputation shattered and decades-long professional relationships destroyed. I don't know what happened. He seemed almost confused. I don't know if the problem was that he was on illegal substances or if he stopped taking them, but it was definitely the most disastrous interview based on scale and scope that I've been a part of. Story 45. I work in a creative industry and was one of the people spearheading a multi-million-dollar project. Interviewed a woman for the head of one of the departments. She came highly recommended by another department head on the project who said this woman had been doing this for 15 years. So we were excited to talk to her. We weren't given a resume and I couldn't find anything about her online. So we, of course, started by asking her to give us a rundown of her previous work experience. She was extremely defensive and told us she was a very humble person who didn't like to brag about the things she'd done. We told her not to worry, and that this was the perfect time to brag about her experiences. She just kept refusing. She told us she felt attacked, like we didn't believe her, and that she had never in her life been made to prove that she knew what she was doing. We told her that this is how job interviews work, and that we would not be able to consider her if she refused to tell us anything about herself or her experience. She said no and that we were unprofessional, so we ended the meeting. Shortly after that, we were sent her resume, not by her, but by the person who recommended her. This was texted to us as a shared iPhone note that was a first, so we could see that she was also the one actively editing it. We ignored it, and then later the candidate contacted us going on and on about how she was told by the person that recommended her that this interview was a formality, and she basically had the job, so she felt like it was unfair of us to question her like that. Needless to say, she wasn't hired, and the other person was severely demoted on the project. Story 46. I have been a partner in a few law firms. My last firm, we were looking for a senior associate. I interviewed an attorney who had lots of experience. He just didn't have a great book of business and had bounced around a few places. I couldn't figure it out. On paper, he had a good resume, and when I met him, he initially presented well. So I asked, "What's your book of business look like?" Which is polite lawyer speak for, "Why haven't you made partner?" He addressed it right away. If you're asking why I haven't made partner, it's the drinking thing. What drinking thing? Well, I've had go into diversion, sort of a state bar AA a few places because of my drinking, and the last place candidly fired me because I have a DUI case coming. I suspect I'll lose my license, but I can still do paralegal work. I just can't go to court, so it's not a big deal. I was kind of gobsmacked. So you have a DUI, so they fired you? No, they can't do that under the ADA, so they claimed I didn't meet expectations. By the way, it's illegal not to hire me for a DUI. Alcoholism's a disease. He then proceeded to tell us why he felt his former firm was unfairly selling him out over one accident. Apparently, he had wrecked his car and fled the scene, but he didn't think he would have to go to jail since it was his first offense. Just bizarre. We didn't hire him. Story 47. I was in charge of finding a new department head at my old company because as the current department head, I was due for a promotion. Candidate walked in, saw me sitting right up front. I always preferred it that way. And I guess he thought I was the secretary because I was young, attractive, and female. Cue a string of the most sexist crap imaginable. Before I could even introduce myself, he asked me where my boss was, asked for a refreshment, commented on my clothing, in a gross way, not complimentary, asked me where my boss was again, and tried to make overtly small hot talk while I tried to finish what I was doing. I told him as soon as I'm done, we can start the interview, and he laughed and said he was interviewing with the department head, not his cute assistant. My boss came out shortly after that comment and introduced himself, then asked me why I hadn't started the interview yet. I calmly replied that I was finishing up some high-level transfer paperwork, but that this gentleman kept distracting me with his attempt at banter. After a second, it clicked with the candidate that I was the person he was interviewing with, I guess when my boss called me by my name, which is pretty unisex, and he started backpedaling while turning a beautiful shade of red. He did not get the job. Story 48. Had a guy come in and interview all right, not the greatest, but certainly not the worst. All the way up to the end of things where he insinuated that at the very least he might get to take one of the ladies out for a drink, which was politely declined. So we tell him, thanks for the time and we'll get back to him as we have other interviews to conduct. He packs up and we walk him out to the guard shack to leave where this dumbass decides to show the two of us a banana pick and ask who wouldn't want that. Yeah, we told him not to come back or contact us again. Story 49. Not me, but H.R. Manger at my former company was sent to interview a possible candidate for the position of factory director. We were considering to open a new site in Iran. The company has HQ in Denmark, and Danes are known for being having an easy, happy-go-lucky attitude and in general being pretty chill. Well, this candidate wanted to show he was a manly man who get things done, I guess. So when presented with the question, "Can you tell us about a conflict you had with a person reporting to you and how you resolved it?" he gave a really wild answer. In short, candidate threw this guy, who was a team leader, in the trunk of his car, drove him out into the desert, and then him and his buddies beat him up and threatened to shoot if he didn't fall in line. He did not get the job, and we reconsidered if we even wanted to open a production site in Iran. Story 50. I had one person being interviewed as our IAT manager. His experience and qualifications were fine, but there was something a little off about him. HR had already done a general background check and it came back clear, so I figured it was probably just a personality thing. One thing that came up was a 4-month gap in his employment. I've never been too fussed, as everyone has a time when they were out of work for a while through no fault of their own. He said it was due to his father being sick and needing help. Fine, no problem there. Coming back up the stairs after seeing him out, one of our nurses, it was a hospital, asked me if she could have a word. Something about the interviewee bothered here. She couldn't remember anything specific, but she had seen him somewhere and it wasn't good. I went back to my office, got on Google, and did some digging. Turns out this character had been arrested earlier in the year for sending a 13-year-old girl a new iPhone, which she used to send him nude photos of herself with her mother's permission. The girl was in another state, so he was extradited there for trial. Because it was an area with some odd religion that considered this practice to be reasonable, he was acquitted at trial, which is why a background check didn't show anything. All around, an unusual situation. Story 51. I've got one we didn't end up interviewing, though I really wanted to. So there was this mega project to build a bridge across a river. The project went for 4 years, then died, but there was this particularly incompetent SQL tech who was hired in year 1. He claimed he wrote a SQL book, which was apparently a lie. Someone else with the same name wrote the book. He failed to bring a single SQL server, an Exchange server, online after a year and a half, and was fired eventually, which is impressively difficult to screw up badly enough to get fired in a state government job. There were 4 others of us in it working for that project, and we got impressive things done before it got shuttered, and we were all relocated into other part of the agency. Anyways, fast forward 10 years later, and we get this familiar-looking applicant. According to his application, he was not in fact fired after a year and a half for incompetence, but was instead let go at the closing of the project after he did all these cool things that he proceeded to list on his resume. Things that I did. It was such a blatant and bald-faced lie, I wanted to bring him in and interview him just to watch the look on his face. But I was overruled on that. This is the same guy who the state patrol called us about after he was leaving bags of flaming cat poop on his own mother's doorstep and calling and leaving her threatening messages. So they thought he might be crazy enough to do something bad. Story 52. In Las Vegas, a candidate for a high-level career track was interviewing fresh out of grad school from Utah, BYU grad. This was his first time in Nevada. He an LDS mission in Indonesia or Malaysia, somewhere in say Asia with a large Muslim population before grad school, so not his first time traveling. He had a full day of interviewing scheduled that included interviews with C-level execs. He was flown in on a Tuesday night and put up in a nice strip casino hotel for Wednesday interviews. I and some other mid-level execs took him to lunch. One of my colleagues in the lunch group was also a devout LDS member. Anyway, the candidate was visibly wired, nervous, and fidgeting. When the waitress asked for drinks, he blurted out that he couldn't have any more caffeine as he was completely wired. My colleague, that was a devout Mormon, then complimented him on not having caffeine. Apparently, caffeine consumption is frowned upon by their church. His response was that it wasn't religious conviction behind his choice, but that he was playing poker for the first time, until 6:30 a.m. and purchased and over the morning consumed a box of no-dos to stay awake for his interviews. He then explained that it was his first time in Nevada. He had his first strong drinks, first experience gambling, and didn't realize that he was gambling for almost 10 HRS straight. Then he proceeded to get sick at lunch at the table. Needless to say, he didn't get the job. If you can't control yourself for 24 hours for interviews, Las Vegas probably isn't the town for you. Story 53. 1. Brought someone in for a seniorette position. Resume was strong, screening call went well. I brought up volunteer work and causes. While the cause was good, he proceeding to talk about abuse victims for almost 15 minutes. There was too much detail involved. I had a female employee shadowing the interview and she was very uncomfortable afterward. 2. Entry-level IT position. Had a former coworker who was looking to break into the industry. He had worked in retail for 15 plus years and was looking for an office job. I told him I would bring him in, but would let some colleagues conduct as much of the interview process as possible because I knew him formerly. Proceeded to show up with a resume that was 1/3 of a page long, gave a ton of one-word answers, didn't even try to be conversational, said I don't know for many answers. My colleagues roasted me for even bringing him in. I was very disappointed. I had to tell him afterward that he needed to do some serious interview prep before trying for something in the future. Story 54. I interviewed a guy that I had previously worked with a bit. No one else on the panel had met him, so I asked him to just tell the rest of the group a bit about himself before we asked any real questions. He stammered for a bit, told us his place of birth, and that he liked bodybuilding. He couldn't get out any other words. I had to direct the questioning after that, so they were very specific, almost to the point of being yes, no questions. I went in really thinking I was going to hire this guy, but couldn't justify it after his interview. Story 55. Not exactly the same thing, but in retrospect, it was the worst interview ever. Working in game audio, we had just lost a very senior level guy and we were essentially hiring our new boss. Dude slams the interview, said all the right words, seemed friendly and amicable. We had a lot of faith in our decision. First day, he's saying the same words. And second day, third, etc. It's like he just Googled game audio terms and memorized them, learned roughly how to use them. But this guy's resume was incredible. He'd worked at a dozen other studios. Turns out he was absolute garbage. We were giving him baby tasks, and he still wasn't delivering. Basic shit that any kid fresh out of college could do in their sleep. Things I taught myself just by trial and error in hours. He cried in meetings when we confronted him about it. We got his ass fired post-haste. He's on my never work with again list for life. We went back and looked at the resume a little closer, made some calls. Turns out he had worked at a dozen other studios for a few months with a year gap in between each one. Really should have caught that earlier. I've never had to hire and fire my own boss before. That was certainly an experience, and I've been a lot more cautious with hiring since then. Story 56. Was interviewing this guy for an engineering position. It was going pretty well. He already had some background in the industry, was multilingual, seemed pretty funny. Things were looking pretty good for this guy. We bring the plant manager in to talk to him and he starts getting agitated. Then he takes off his shoes and socks. We're like, dude, you okay? He says, this guy keeps messing with me and points over the shoulder that has no one behind him. Then he stands up and acts like he's going to remove his pants and we stop him. Obviously, he's having some sort of episode, but he's gone no communication on us. I run to get him a bottle of water and just see if we can keep him calm until he rides it out. About 5 minutes later, he shakes his head, looks at us and says, so when can I start? I showed him out and said we'd be in touch. Next day, the guy shows up again apologizing for missing the appointment the day before and wants to see if we'll interview him today. He did not get the job. Story 57. Not my story, but a friend of mine. He was interviewing for the position of regional executive for a tech behemoth. Shortlisted to one of 10. However, a few days before his interview, he had a psychotic break and, of course, did not realize it. He spent the 2 interviews spouting the most outlandish conspiracy theories. One of the interviewers told him flat out it was the weirdest interview they had ever conducted. He ended up hospitalized after trying to beat a relative. He bravely recounted all of this in one of his YouTube videos, going as far as to reveal the stigmatized side effects he suffers from because of the meds he has to take. Story 58. Guy came off straight away as a douche. Imagine the D-bag uniform, minus only the gold chains. Greasy. Was bragging about his 5-page resume that showed all these places he was hired at. I had trouble finding a job he was at for 12 months, over the course of the past 15 years. Showing that nobody wants to keep you around isn't the flex he thought it was. Being hired at lots of places equals sign being let go from a lot of places. And no, you did not drive long-term corporate strategy in a place you barely warmed up your laptop at. Story 59. Do medical residency interviews count? If so, I had an overconfident fledgling doctor being his spitter cup into the interview. I thought it was coffee at first, which is also a little faux pas. Then when I realized he kept spitting his chewing tobacco spit into it, I mentally tore up his application in my head. Story 60. Not necessarily a high-level position, but a critical one. I work for an aviation company, and we work with a lot of very expensive airplanes. This role was as a line technician, towing these very expensive airplanes all over the ramp. It's critical to our operation, and obviously safety is imperative. We advised the candidate of our illegal substances and alcohol policy, and their response was, "That's not an issue. I only do it with my friends and family now." The other interviewer and I were dumbstruck. Story 61. Not a specific interview, but a series. It seems that there is either a certain school or interview prep program in India that teaches people how to get regulatory positions. Every single candidate spoke in only buzzwords and refused to say what they actually have experience in. I would as a question, and they would proceed to list off every regulatory term that they knew, not what they had done, what they have heard of. I'd ask them to go into more depth about anything, and they just started spewing more terminology. It was like talking to Google search results, which I guess could have been the case since they were remote interviews. It was obvious that they had no idea what they were talking about. I say it was a prep program from India because all of these candidates came from the same area, Hyderabad, if memory serves. Story 62. I was on a panel for a reasonably important job that had lots of interactions with different government agencies. It was sort of a collaboration and communication position. So this dude comes in dressed like someone cosplaying as a junior college English professor, if that makes sense. I don't remember exactly what it was, but he spent 40 minutes answering the first question. Just kept droning on and on and on. After a while, he totally lost me, and I started looking around and noticed he had a partially eaten bagel sandwich in his corduroy jacket pocket. It was in a plastic package that was open and was sticking out of the pocket a little. The rest of the interview, all I did was stare at this sandwich, wondering about his decision-making process and how he got to this point in his life, completely oblivious to the outside world. He didn't even seem nervous, like he was searching for the words, just lost in his own narrative and hoping to finish that sandwich. He didn't get the job. Story 63. She dropped an F-bomb during the interview. No, not the other asterisk one. She asked if I knew if there were any working on this contact. Y'all, I was hiring a position for a liaison to work with my then contractor, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. For some reason, I wasn't really comfortable with her being the face of my company, especially when considering government relations. Story 64. Not me, but I work with people with learning difficulties, and they have to apply to jobs as part of their welfare support. Only one of them doesn't understand job hunting. He thinks it's a lottery. You apply to jobs and win them. No amount of explaining helps, so he's applied for all sorts of things like airline pilot. Story 65. As a faculty member, I'm often asked to interview candidates for leadership roles at the college. This includes dean positions, provosts, vice presidents, directors, etc. At least one candidate each cycle will think that they should weep while talking about the community and learning. I've been teaching for 22 years, most of that in higher education. I've been at the same community college for 15 of those 22 years. I'm passionate and care deeply about both my students and the community, and I've never come close to crying. Not even in the ballpark, and I'm an emotional guy. One idiot started reciting a poem he'd written about the community. I teach poetry. His poem was shit. This idiot grabbed my hand as he read the poem and he started weeping. I couldn't control it, and I laughed. It was so damned ridiculous. I didn't do it to be mean. It just kind of happened. I was kindly asked not to laugh at candidates in the future. Story 66. The opposite side of this. Years ago, I interviewed with a law firm for one of their financial positions. The interview was scheduled through a recruiter who had lied to me about the position requirements and heavily lied to the company about my capabilities and experience. It was the most embarrassing interview of my life. I was thrown to the wolves and tested on things I had no idea how to do. After an hour of one of the worst interviews of my life, the lawyers looked at me and said I failed their basic tasks, and that continuing any more of the interview was a waste of everyone's time. I was so mad because I had literally never lied about my skill set. I didn't even overinflate what skills I did have. I was pretty blunt and honest with what I could do, but the recruiter just forced me in. Story 67. Used to interview for sensitive government and military positions that required an extensive background check. Bro thought it was a good idea to apply while being under investigation for bank robbery. Had to discuss every detail of the crime with him and get his explanation of just how he ended up with the money in his car while leaving the state, even though he swore it was a mysterious, no-name guy who did it. Story 68. Reverse scenario. In college, I interviewed for a law clerk position at a firm and actually had a chat with a very high-up lady to end the interview. She asked all the usual questions, why I wanted the job, why I think I'd enjoy it, etc. I gave all the textbook answers. She responds with, "Really? You think you'll actually like it here?" Puzzled, she proceeds to tell me how much she disliked it there, and that I'd be doing myself a favor to not be there, lol. Told her, high-up hiring lady just needed a young stranger's ear to vent about how she hated her job. Story 69. There was a candidate for a position at my last company that I had a chance to interview. When we asked him why he wanted a position at our company, he said he didn't get along with his coworkers at his last job and was looking for a change of scenery. This is already a red flag, but we pushed a bit further and asked why he didn't get along with his coworkers. He looked left, then looked right like he was making sure nobody else was listening and said, "Because I was the only white guy there." He did not get the job. Story 70. Not an interview, but the follow-up. We had a sales manager with a small team, including a young woman. With some luck, she managed to get a large contract signed. In the management meeting, our sales management made it look as if he had done all the work and should get the signing bonus. My CEO was not having any of it. A few weeks later, we needed a new sales manager. That is not the end of the story. A few months later, I got a phone call from a high-level manager of a large company. The sales manager had given my name as a reference. I was polite and mentioned that I was not asked to be a reference, and it would not have been a good idea if he had asked me. The phone caller was quiet and said, "Okay, I know enough. If you mention someone as a reference, then please contact them first." Story 71. I'm going to preface this by saying this story isn't funny, and it wasn't funny at the time either. We interviewed someone for a director position. We all went out to lunch. At some point, the topic of kids came up, which is typically not a topic we encourage during interviews, as that's one of those things you don't want to be claimed as a discriminatory decision for not hiring. But it came up. I don't even remember the context, as this was 20 years ago. The candidate starts crying. Turns out their son had died fairly recently, and they were still understandably very raw. It upset us all, and we basically had to call the interview there and follow up later. Good news is, we did end up hiring this person. Story 72. I was interviewing for a business analyst, requirements writer, and we asked each candidate for a sample of their work. One candidate submitted a large, full-fledged specification that I was a little skeptical about, so I searched some of the text and found that it was done as an academic exercise at McGill University, to which the candidate had no connection and was not listed as an author or contributor. I discovered this about an hour before the interview, and the HR rep was able to contact her and ask her if she plagiarized the document and if she wanted to continue the interview. My first question was to directly accuse her of plagiarism, and she stuck to her guns. I told her I didn't believe her, but we let the interview continue for a very uncomfortable hour. That afternoon, our HR rep managed to contact the professor at McGill, who had no knowledge of our candidate and was as surprised as we were. Story 73. The guy during interview for director role said something along the lines of, "I have no issues with rich colored people." It was a question about interview practices and how he would approach it. Voted no on him. He got hired anyways. Was a raging asshole. Was let go within 6 months of constant drama. Story 74. Not an interview, but a request for resumes. Put out on LinkedIn that a friend was looking to fill an GS-14 position, direct hire, for a very specific skill. Among other things, the person has to have an active top-secret security clearance with PSI and a current polygraph. I get a response from someone almost immediately. No clearance. And not just no active clearance. Never had a clearance. Ever. None of the skills required for the job. Not a surprise because it is impossible to be qualified for the position without a clearance. The skills they did have were not related in any way, shape, or form to the position. It would be like applying to be a FedEx pilot, and your experience was with Uber Eats marketing. Person was seriously butthurt that I told her she wasn't qualified for the job. Story 75. I started with the standard opener. So, why did you apply for this role? She reached into her bag, pulled out the job description, and read it back to me, word for word, like she was discovering it for the first time along with me. That was awkward, but it got worse. Her phone started ringing loudly. She dug back into her bag, and instead of apologizing and silencing it, she answered it, mid-interview. She had a full-on chat with her mate, like we weren't sitting there for an actual job interview. At that point, I was just sitting there in stunned silence, half wondering if I was being pranked. Unsurprisingly, she didn't get the job, but to top it off, she later demanded feedback on her performance. I honestly didn't even know where to start. Story 76. A CIO who was very sick should have rescheduled his interview. Instead, he sat there with his nose running, wiping it away with his hands and then wiping that on his pants like a 2-year-old. Needless to say, I refused to shake his hand after the interview and just told him I didn't want to get sick. I was so grossed out and nauseous through the entire interview I thought I might throw up. Story 77. Not exactly high level, but I did an interview for a retail manager position. I asked, if I were to contact your previous manager, what would they say your opportunities for improvement are? This is a rephrasing of the very common, "What are your weaknesses?" question. The response was, "Oh, definitely accountability. I'm not very good at being responsible for stuff or making people do the things they're supposed to do. I usually call my boss for that." I sat in stunned silence for a moment before saying, okay, great. So that's the end of the prepared questions for today. Thanks for coming in. And the interview was over. Like, dude, that's the whole job. You just told me you can't do the job you're applying for. What are we even doing here? Story 78. A couple years ago, I was interviewing someone for an engineering role, automotive radar engineer. Mid-career level, we were looking for someone with around 10 years of experience. The guy's resume was a little light, but we were having trouble finding someone, so we decided to give him a shot. It quickly became apparent that his resume was a lie. He had maybe a year or two of experience at most, and was struggling to even answer basic technical questions about how a radar works. He could tell he was bombing the interview too. The interview was on Teams, and eventually he just slid off his chair and hid under his desk. He spent like 5 minutes under there and eventually came back up with some made-up story about his blood sugar being low. By that point, I was literally biting my tongue not to laugh at this poor guy. Story 79. I worked at a university in the information technology department, and our vice chancellor resigned. Another vice chancellor who was not technologically savvy was made interim VC. The position was posted, and everyone that applied for the job had to give a presentation to the whole department, and we had an opportunity to ask questions. We had highly qualified people from all over the country come to give great presentations, and were able to answer our questions thoroughly. The interim VC did her presentation reading straight off of PowerPoint slides like a high schooler and not adding much to it. I doubt she made that PP herself. When we asked questions, her answers were just a bunch of political mumbo-jumbo. Guess who got the job? Story 80. Had a software engineer show up for an interview with a binder database, showing all of the job applications and interviews he had over a period of like 2 years. Hundreds of pages with detailed notes, skills needed, interviewer names. These were printouts of his database. It was a long time ago. I think it was Paradox. Dude, this is not something to share. Did I hire him? No, sir, I did not. Story 81. I was supposed to interview a guy, but he was meeting with the HR recruiter before me for some paperwork. Right before my interview time, the recruiter came into my office and said we wouldn't be interviewing the candidate. I asked why, and she came into my office, shut the door, and told me that when she was getting him to sign NDA paperwork, he was flirting with her. Eventually, he asked for her phone number and she refused. Then he insisted she had to give him her number and escalated to, "I'm not leaving here without your digits." She called security and they had to drag him out, screaming, "Gimme your digits!" the whole time. Needless to say, we did not interview him. With that kind of leadership, we hired him directly to CEO position. Okay, that part isn't true. Story 82. A few months ago, I was part of a panel interview for a management-level candidate. The first couple of interviews went swimmingly, right up until we got to a well-dressed, well-groomed guy who wore a bright pin on his suit jacket, displaying the logo and motto of our biggest competitor. He proceeded to answer every question confidently with some kind of allusion or reference to projects, concepts, and buzzwords that had **0*** relevance to our company, but were all available on our competitor's website. At one point, my co-interviewer pulled up our competitor's vision and mission statement on his phone and asked the candidate, "What is our vision and mission?" To his credit, the guy recited it all nearly word for word. To his disappointment and perhaps confusion, we did not hire him. I wonder why. Story 83. I conducted a virtual interview once where the interviewee's wife was walking around naked behind him, casually getting ready just in the other end of the room. The interviewee had no idea. I tried not to react or acknowledge it because I didn't want to embarrass anyone, but it was a memorable interview. Story 84. I was a director at the group company asked to give a second opinion on a potential CTO hire in one of our subsidiaries, since the subsidiary CEO had no tech or its skills whatsoever. The candidate couldn't answer any questions, argued that we should know that at a senior level, he shouldn't be expected to know the tech stack of his current company, and then proceeded to reposition himself to say he should be interviewing for a role as the group CEO instead. We cut the interview short. Story 85. We had someone interview for a network engineer position and didn't know the answer to half the questions we asked him. We asked all candidates the same questions. A few months later, we had another opening, and he reapplied. He was asked the exact same questions as before and still didn't know the answers. In my personal experience, if I was ever asked a question in an interview that I didn't know the answer to, I immediately looked it up after the interview. I would know it if ever asked again. Story 86. I had a frat boy interview with me and my team. His whole interview, I would ask the questions, and he would answer only to the male team member inserting his frat boy stories, joking around and never truly answer the asked questions. As the interview finished up, he shakes the team member's hand and says, "Hey man, I look forward to working with you." My team member replies, "Yeah, I have a feeling that won't happen as you ignored up the whole time." His look was priceless. Story 87. Okay, this was not for a high-level position, but I worked in the cable-related industry, and we interviewed a guy for a front-end development position. It was going fine. He was moderately skilled, but mid-interview he was talking about some recent work he did, and it had something to do with web content or design for the then-recent movie Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. He was talking about this at some length, referring to the movie as Ron Burgundy for short, but he didn't say Ron Burgundy. He mistakenly said Ron Jeremy every time. No one asked about it or corrected him. It's hard to describe how difficult it was not to laugh. Did not get the job, but not because of that mix-up. Story 88. I was conducting an interview for a senior engineer, software. We had some basic problem-solving exercises and code reviews that we would let a person have some time to look at, that we would come back together and discuss. We come back after 30 minutes or so, and the individual hadn't done much of anything. He hadn't thought through the problem-solving exercises, the code exercises, or the code reviews. After the interview was over, we went back to review the exercises and code reviews and couldn't figure out how he had spent his time. We ended up checking his browser history, and lo and behold, he had spent his time submitting pull requests to a library he was a maintainer of. Story 89. Way too late for this. but I'm a CEO headhunter. The absolute worst was an experienced CEO who utilized infant noises, imitations of their emotions, with whining and high-pitched pleas throughout the conversations when he wanted to drive points home. It clearly was a tactic versus his natural reality from the way the conversation went. I didn't have a clue how I was going to tell the company that, despite being qualified, he's a pass for acting like a baby. Thankfully, the PE firm I was working with happened to know him and agreed that he would not be appropriate due to his behavior style. He left me 3 or 4 whiny voicemails after the fact too. I want to reiterate, this man was a seasoned CEO. Story 90. I work for a very large government agency and was the representative for the union when they went to hire an exec-level position. Some of the candidates were super high-power people who had done stuff like integrating HR departments after 9/11s to make up Homeland Security, that sort of thing. And then there was a guy whose name escapes me now, but his primary agency-level change that he talked about was reorganizing the mailroom at a 10-person department for the city he lived in. Nice guy, but putting him in that job would have been like throwing chum into a pod of sharks. I felt sorry for him. Story 91. I was part of a panel doing interviews for a C-suite position. One guy looked pretty solid. He was out of state but interested in moving to our area. Initial interviews went well, so we flew him down. Someone decided to really dive into his LinkedIn and then do some more internet stalking. This led to some pretty big red flags that they forwarded to the panel. It was pretty obvious he was a no. Unfortunately, he was already on the flight for a big interview and a half day of meetings. That was an awkward as f*** interview. Story 92. I had a guy say he was proficient in SQL on his resume, spelled out like that. I asked if he could tell me what SQL was used for. He could not. I asked about all these impressive engineering projects he did in school, and he kept saying, "My team built this," or "My team built that." When I asked, "But what did you do on this team?" he just stared confused and went back to what the team did. I'm genuinely not sure if he ever even went to school or if he just faked a resume with buzzwords to try and get an it job. He knew less than nothing. Story 93. It's happened twice now that somebody gets into the interview with me and starts asking about the real interviewer. I'm a petite mid-20s Asian woman who gets mistaken for a teenager sometimes. One guy thought it was take your daughter to work day, and my dad would be showing up in a bit to do the interview. Story 94. It was a Teams interview with webcams on. We'd had issues with one person interviewing and a different one showing up to work. Every single technical question we asked, we could clearly see him type it into Google and just read off the first results. He even leaned forward and slightly twisted his head side to side as he read the text. It was painfully obvious. On one hand, learning how to just Google shit is an important skill, but he also showed no sense to even try and analyze. Even stuff that was blatantly not the answer to our question. Story 95. Served on a committee, hiring the next director for a program at a 4-year university. When asking the candidate why they think they might be a good fit for the role, they said that they have worked in the impoverished neighborhoods with black children who hated them because they themselves are white, so that has prepared them for this role. We all were confused and shocked at the comment. It was completely irrelevant to the position and its responsibilities. Story 96. She was interviewing for a director's position. In the middle of the interview, she pulled out a bag of Wendy's and started eating. She said that it was okay because it shows that she could multitask. She proceeded to chew with her mouth open, talk with her mouth full of food, and spilled ketchup on her blouse in several spots. As we were ending the interview, she burped loudly. She did not get the job and actually asked for another interview with a different panel because we treated her unfairly. Story 97. I was interviewing someone for a high-level engineering position that, depending on knowledge of advanced reliability techniques, they had on their resume that they had worked for a bunch of aerospace companies. So I asked them a bunch of questions about Class S reliability, which is a super basic standard thing in aerospace. They literally ran away after stumbling over words for a bit, then ghosted any further attempts to reach them. That one gave me a reputation for a bit about scaring candidates away. Story 98. I was the interviewer and my colleague was shadowing me. She's an Asian woman. The candidate was already pretty weird and wasn't doing well with my questions. Our time was over and me and my colleague got up to leave and pass him on to the next interviewer. He shook my hand and then turned to me, colleague, and bowed. Somehow we got out of that room before totally cracking up. Shockingly, he didn't get the job. Story 99. I don't know whether it qualifies as high level, but as a programmer, the number of times I've had to interview people who blatantly lied on their resume and couldn't answer the simplest questions about programming was absurd. Like, dude, did you think the technical stuff just wasn't going to come up in the interview? Story 100. My cousin, a partner at his accounting firm, was reviewing an application with a time gap in the resume. My cousin remembered a lot of the other details from a previous application and did a search on a legal name change site on a hunch. Turns out the gap was a conviction for offenses against ladies, and the applicant had legally changed his name and applied again. Story 101. I was a director-level employee at a tech company and was on the interview team for a VP-level employee. I was amazed at how disrespectfully he treated me during the interview, as if he couldn't believe that a mere director was on the team to interview him. We would have had the same boss and therefore peers, but it didn't seem to matter to him. Needless to say, I torpedoed his candidacy and we picked someone who respected people at all levels. Story 102. About 15 years ago, we were interviewing for a field position, kind of a building project inspector for development and operations way out in the woods. The position had to work closely with other agencies, including IFW and game wardens. Background questions about this and that. Eventually, he told us he had been in jail for poaching. That was a pretty hard nope. Story 103. I was at a high-tech startup in Silicon Valley. The interviewee had no technical aptitude. He pretty much lied on his resume and couldn't answer simple questions that he should have easily known the answers to. I sat back in my chair and asked him why he wanted to work for our company. He told me, "I want to make a lot of money. I hear startups pay a lot, and I want to make a lot of money." Story 104. High level is subjective, but it was a $75K a year position in Montana, so it's a pretty comfortable life. The board contained several technical questions, and there were at least 10 applicants, so it was 8+ hours straight process. One guy literally said, "I don't know, I'll get back to you," on every single technical question. The board president was so pissed he ripped into the guy hard. Dude left in tears. Super awkward. Story 105. Long ago in my early 20s, I interviewed for a job at a local bookstore. Interviewer asked me which authors I like, and I could only think of two, Stephen King and Anne Rice. So I made up some names. Made up the authors and the book titles, thinking there's so many out there that nobody would know the difference. Didn't get hired. Story 106, not sure if this qualifies, but interviewed someone for senior dev role, and when asked how he deals with conflict, he replied with, "Oh, I pretty much get along with everyone." Then paused and immediately followed it up with, "But I also don't take from anybody." Was kind of a rap after that one.